Portions of this show are recorded. Strap in and be prepared.
You just heard Baby J about 3 minutes give his entire A to Z on what was going on. I didn't interrupt you.
I don't even I got to everything, honestly.
No, you didn't get to everything.
Interesting guests.
Kelly Graves, Mike Parker, Josh Pate, Melissa Lombardi, Yogi Roth, who said that Justin and I are smart.
Sharp opinions.
I think Dan Lanning's sitting in his office going, you know what, fine, give us the toughest road to win the national championship. That's what it should be.
I think that this team is going to go as far as Malik Murphy takes them. There's a lot to like about this offense if he's who we think he could be.
And some smiles.
Is this thing on?
Is this thing working? No, that's why you got to do this. You got to go.
Hello?
Hello? Testing, testing,
it's like the little
testing.
girl in Nemo where she's tapping on the glass.
Fishy! Fishy, wake up, Fishy!
It's Danny Havel.
We have to be more specific. We have a lot of pickle things going on,
know.
apparently.
Justin Grossweiner.
I've been wrong before, but that's what I think.
Danny and Justin starts now on Fox Sports Eugene and Newport. Danny's taking a day off for load management. Here's Justin.
Hello, neighbors. No, it is not Danny Havel. We are high atop the Delta Triad, though, in the Bigfoot Beverages Studios. The Danny and Justin radio program here on a Tuesday. Just Justin today. Danny's to be gone till next Friday. He's to be in Hawaii. I'm going to be taking him to the airport on Thursday. That's already been decided. Steve Mims is going to join me tomorrow. But yes, today is the Just Justin program. Always like a good alliteration. It's going to be a lot of fun to talk about the Civil War today. Obviously, an important week here in both Eugene and in Corvallis. Also along the coast in Newport, 92.7 Fox Sports Newport. Listening in there. We're going to have Erik Skopil join us from 24/7 Sports around 2:20. And I think it's the first time we've talked to him since the season began. Maybe we talked to him Montana State Week. I can't remember. It all kind of melds together after the season starts. But I'm going to be interested in hearing his thoughts about this Oregon team as they have started off 3-0. And they're playing really well. Obviously not a great fourth quarter. The first thing I'm going to ask him is how much weight do we have on that fourth quarter, because I think it'll be interesting to see. I know Dan Lanning was talking about that. We're going to get some audio from Dan Lanning and also Trent Bray, head coach for the Oregon State Beavers. A lot of questions about him right now, but I want to start off talking about moving, because I'm moving right now. I'm in the process of it. I've been apartment hunting, and it's something that is not the most fun thing, but I've been getting through it, and it's tough here in Eugene to find places to live at times. But I ended up finding a place that actually I used to live in for the past 4 years, or not past 4 years. I used to live there for about 4 years' time, 17 to 2020-ish time. So getting back to a little bit of familiarity for me. I was kind of hunting and looking around. I really like where I live right now. I kind of live by the station here at Fox Sports here in Eugene. I live over by the Delta Pond area. It's really nice over there at the River Terrace Apartments, but needed to make a change, and so I'm heading back over to the South Eugene area. So excited about that. Kind of excited to have that all taken care of. I've had some bad experiences finding places in Eugene, renting. So certainly, not something that is the most fun thing, but happy to have that sort of off my plate a little bit, get to enjoy some football. Football season's fully underway here now. Second week of NFL games finally wrapped up last night. You were listening here on Fox Sports Eugene, Fox Sports Newport, official home of the Chargers, and they win 20-9, and unfortunately, no 3 TDs, so no free cake this week. But I think there's going to be a lot of free cake over for the Chargers this year, because, man, I don't necessarily think they played their best, quite honestly, but they get a 20-9 win. It's a win over a division opponent, and man, as much as anything, they made the Raiders look bad. Geno Smith with 3 interceptions. That's the most I think he's had in his career in the first half. I want to say they were almost all in the first half. Ashton Genty did not do much for my fantasy team. He is making me slightly regret getting him in 2 different leagues. Only 43 yards on 11 carries. Pretty much was bottled up all by this Chargers defense, which really looked good. did not allow a touchdown, and just has been a really good start to this Jim Harbaugh team, who obviously, I think that there's not a lot of people coming into the season that were super duper high on the Chargers. And I think that first win over the Chiefs kind of changed the perception a little bit, although now the Chiefs are 0-2 for the first time in the Patrick Mahomes era, which is kind of crazy to say. And I also think that this is the first time they've had a 3-game losing streak under Patrick Mahomes. I'll have to check my notes on that one, but it's crazy numbers for Patrick Mahomes. We always kind of debate who's the best quarterback in the NFL. Ultimately, I think guys can have better years year to year. Like, any given time. Last year, I had Lamar Jackson as the best quarterback in the NFL. I know Josh Allen won MVP, but I just think that Lamar Jackson was the best player last year. I think overall, though, if you look at the totality of a career, you're going to take a guy like Patrick Mahomes simply because of what he has done. But Chargers, they beat the Chiefs in Brazil week 1. Then they go to Allegiant Stadium, and Justin Herbert looks really good. 19-27, 242 yards. The weapons are there. There's concern coming into the year about the weapons, and then Mike Williams was going to come back alongside his former receiving mate, Keenan Allen, and he decides to retire basically the first week of training camp or a couple of weeks before the season. I can't remember the timeline of that now, but he didn't make it to the season. He was expected to be on the team. But a guy that I think everybody kind of wrote off is breaking out, Quentin Johnston. How about that? So for your fantasy owners out there, I think there might be a little bit of something here with Quentin Johnston, because he might just be in that Mike Williams role. I think they killed the man, not the idea. The idea of Mike Williams is still there with Quentin Johnston because he needs a guy to throw the ball down deep as a kind of go guy. And that's what Mike Williams did for Justin Herbert for many, many years. They had Keenan Allen as the third down, middle of the field slot guy. Ladd McConkey obviously had a great season last year, but he hasn't necessarily been the featured guy like people thought he might be over the first couple weeks of the season. Quentin Johnston, Keenan Allen, both touchdowns in this game. I just think it's a really good receiver set. Trey Harris also made a 24-yard catch in this one as well. Najee Harris has been doing solid. I mean, they're still charging. Let's be honest here. There's still some charging going on. I think it was in the fourth quarter when Omarion Hampton, the rookie, fumbled it. He did not have a good game. If there's some things you want to pick on for the Chargers, it's Omarion Hampton did not have a great game. Najee Harris actually came in there at the end and was getting the big carries to run out the clock, and he actually didn't look too bad, but it wouldn't necessarily pick him up in fantasy if that's what you're thinking. Omarion Hampton certainly been disappointing so far, but it's early. And then they went for it on a fourth down. That was kind of confusing. Overall, the Chargers didn't look great, but that's why I'm kind of optimistic about this team, to be honest with you, because didn't have the best game, but they found a way to get it done. Going forward with their schedule, they're going to go to they're going to play Denver coming off of a tough loss to the Colts. Then they play the Giants, who had an out-of-body experience from Russell Wilson for over 400 yards. Washington, Miami. So their schedule is sort of favorable. Washington is sort of scuffling right now. I think that this is a good spot to get Denver, although they're going to be a back-against-the-wall team. We're going to talk about teams that are back against the wall a lot today with the Oregon State Beavers. Get there in just a moment here on the Danny and Justin radio program, Fox Sports Eugene and Fox Sports Newport. Just talking about the Chargers right now. And their win last night, 20-9 over the Las Vegas Raiders. Man, Las Vegas Raiders and Los Angeles Chargers, not what I grew up with, but here we are. But I think it was a great win. I think Justin Herbert looks great. I think that this offense looks really, really good. The Khalil Mack injury, I think, is maybe the biggest concern coming out of that game. But I will remain to be seen about when he's going to be available next. There's still some charging going on, so I don't know if you can trust this team quite yet. But I think it's going to be a fun year. I think it's going to be a fun year for the NFL as well. Right now, as I mentioned, the Chiefs are not doing super duper hot. They're 0-2 for the first time in the Patrick Mahomes era, and they're in a division now that I think is going to be a dogfight with the Chargers and the Broncos. The Eagles have won a couple games, but just are becoming that team that just isn't. Maybe they're the Chiefs of last year, where they're that team that just wins games, but they're not fun to watch, and they're effective, but they're just I think there's just questions about the explosiveness of their offense right now. The Packers, my Packers. I don't want to talk about the Packers because I honestly feel like my opinion's sort of biased, but I feel really good about the Packers. Their defense looks awesome. I don't think statistically they're the best defense in the league, but they're just really, really impressive. Micah Parsons has totally changed their team, and he's one of those players that people criticized him on Dallas because of not being able to completely just make a defense like number one or anything like that. They had some really solid pieces, and they kind of just kept losing around Parsons and losing around Parsons. But man, on the Packers, with their young defensive talent that they had, he has been such a ceiling raiser for their defense and given them an element that they don't have. So I think that they're a real contender. The Vikings, J.J. McCarthy, man, he's going to get injured. He did get injured, I should say, and I'm just not sold on their quarterback situation there as a real contender for this season. Detroit looked really, really good against the Chicago Bears, who, man, it's looking like it could be one of those seasons for the Bears. Obviously, there's whispers. But I think it's going to be a fun NFL season. It's going to be a fun week, though, as we talk about the Civil War. And I wanted to kind of take a just peek at where these teams are ranked. I know that these numbers are going to be very skewed one side versus another. I'm obviously talking about Oregon versus Oregon State's numbers. But I just think it's interesting just looking at these numbers heading into the year. So Oregon is number 3 in the country points per game. They have 51.5 exactly points per game. That's going to be the standard. They are 13th in yards per game. I think the defense has put them in advantageous positions, I guess, compared to the top 2 or 3 teams in the leagues. They have about 500 yards a game. That's obviously the standard. They are number 3 in yards per play. So they've just obviously had some big chunk plays. Trent Bray and Coach Lanning have talked about how this offense is really reliant on chunk plays. 60% on third down. That's 4th in the nation. They are 50% on 4th down. That's 65th in the nation. And then they have not failed to score in the red zone. So they're 100%. So they're obviously going to be tied for number 1 in the nation. And completion percentage, passing completion percentage are 17th. Overall, the passing offense hasn't been super duper crazy. They don't have the most amount of passing yards per game. They're 37th in the nation, but I think certainly that 250 passing versus rushing is what they're shooting for. As we're talking about the Ducks here on the Danny and Justin radio program, 102.9 FM, 1050 AM here in Eugene, 92.7 out on the coast in Newport. But the Ducks, obviously, really, really good start to the year. They're 17th in turnover margin and penalties per game. They're 3rd, only 3 per game so far. So this has been a really impressive team so far. Obviously, there's just been a lot of, talk about like this last week and Northwestern, and it wasn't the best game, but the competition hasn't been great, let's be honest with you. But overall, this is what you want to see out of a team that is in the early stages, and I want to go on the record and say, man, I was wrong about this team, and I should have trusted the process of Dan Lanning a little bit more than I guess I did. I not that I was doubting this team, but I just sort of was more wait and see. And I think I even put down at some point or said that like I wouldn't be like surprised if this team had 3 losses, and that's kind of sounds ridiculous at this point. I think 3 losses for this team would certainly be a disappointment. They're being talked about as one of the best teams in the nation. Talked a little bit yesterday about my thoughts on how they were dropped in the rankings and whatnot. But overall, it's been a really good start to the year for the Ducks. I'm going to get more to them in the last segment as we're here on the Danny and Justin radio program, Fox Sports Eugene and Newport. But I want to talk about the Beavers as well. They are 96th in the nation in points per game, 18.7, 65th in yards with 374. Conversions on third down, not quite as good, but not terrible, 44%, which is 37th in the nation. They're 38th in the nation on conversions on 4th down. I'm guessing it's 2 out of 3 because it's exactly 66.67%. And they're 70% scoring in the red zone, which isn't super great in the nation. That's about 100th, which, kind of makes sense. They've had some turnovers in the red zone area, so that kind of overall makes sense. Their biggest issues, obviously, being special teams. Yards per rush, they're 128th, though. That's pretty bad. That's 2.6 yards per carry. This is a team that wants to be balanced. We know the Beavers have this passing, they've traditionally been a power run type team, and obviously Malik Murphy's kind of changed things with their passing attack. But just kind of initial thoughts on this game is just like, I think the worst thing that possibly could have happened to Oregon State is Oregon having a bad fourth quarter against Northwestern. I just do. I think that Dan Lanning and the Ducks were never going to overlook this game. I mean, we'll get to some quotes here in a little bit from Dan, but about just what the rivalry means to this school and how they view it and how they think the players view it and who they look upon in terms of the leaders of talking about the importance of this game. Like, clearly for Oregon, this game means something. They were never going to overlook it, but man, when you hear Dan Lanning talk about the fourth quarter, you're just like, he's gonna get them ready for this game. Like, there's no way that they're not going to be ready for this game. It's at home. There obviously is not certainty about whether or not this game is going to be played going forward. So I think that Dan Lanning is going to have his team ready to play. And I think that, quite honestly, like, it's a 34.5 point spread. I think that's where I saw it last, and I don't think a lot of people are giving the Beavers a chance in this game. If they do have a chance in this game, I think that the offensive line has to hold up. I just think that's going to be the biggest thing. This game has obviously just been won in the trenches, and it's just one of those rivalries that just has always come down to the offensive lines and the defensive lines and what they've been able to do together. But Trent Bray, on just the side of the Oregon State Beavers, what this means from them and why it's a big game for the Beavers.
It's a big game because you're playing, a team in the top 10. That resonates with every player. The Oregon versus Oregon State for a player, yeah, it's not what it used to be. Conference alignment, guys are moving from here to there. So that part of it for the players. Now the fans are different, but for the players, it's a game against a top level opponent, and that's the exciting thing in an environment that's going to be great.
Totally think there's validity to that with how much player turnover there is. I mean, like Malik Murphy, he just got here last spring. Like, he doesn't have all the lore and the history of the Oregon State-Oregon rivalry. It's going to be important for him because it's a big game. And I think that totally makes sense. But I do think that there's a sense of, like, yes, they understand that for the fans, this is a big game as well. So how are they preparing for Oregon?
Yeah, you got to get them ready for a hostile environment. Learn from what you experienced at Texas Tech, because that was another hostile environment. And then you got to eliminate explosive plays, which is easier said than done against a team like that. But that's really what these two offenses, Tech and Oregon, thrive on is big plays, chunks of 20 or more. So that's what we got to limit.
A couple more quotes from Trent Bray here as we're going to talk to Erik Skopil from 24/7 Sports in just a few minutes. But biggest issue, obviously, with this team right now is the long snapper situation. You have the starter, Dylan Black, who suffered an injury in practice. Jackson Robertson, clearly going through a case of the yips. And I just think there's a lot of questions, and they're valid. I think there's some valid questions about how does this situation happen?
Well, so you come in with two long snappers. Dylan Black, who's done it for a long time. He gets hurt against Cal. Then Jackson was our backup long snapper, who had started for us all last year and did a nice job, and then ran into a situation at Fresno where, from a mental standpoint, it just, he couldn't snap the ball back there, and that kind of was what happened in practice as well. So you got a young guy in Will Haverland, who's a true freshman. That's the other guy that is long snapper, your third long snapper. And so when you're down to your third long snapper, it can create some issues no matter what program you're in.
I guess I'll have to take his word for it. I mean, it just seems like it's one of those situations where it doesn't feel like this is what should be happening. I mean, you have the backup guy that obviously has some confidence issues. It's not like there's an injury. Totally valid. I think that it's one of those things that just happens, and you have to work through it, clearly. But in a really critical part of your schedule, when it's just one of the really critical pieces of this game, it's just a tough one. It's a tough one, and they're going to have to get that going and have to figure it out going forward. There's just no way they're going to beat a team like Oregon. Another huge issue, giving up a couple really big third and longs, including a 3rd and 26 for a touchdown, another 3rd and 24, 25 or so that for a big gain got it down to the 1 yard line. So that's a big focus as well for this Trent Bray squad.
Yeah, there were some particular plays that I'd mentioned the third and extra longs, the two that really broke our back in the game. They threw the ball behind the line of scrimmage and got not only a first down but a touchdown. And we had guys that weren't running to the ball that could have been a factor and got the guy on the ground. So that was the biggest thing that we talked about is you don't know when you're going to be the impact on the play. You have no idea. And so you got to chase the ball every single play like you're going to be the factor in our success on that play. And so, again, continuing to drill that into these guys' heads. And because it wasn't something we'd seen, Fresno, we took a huge step forward in how the physicality, the effort, and we kind of took a step back, which wasn't good to see.
Certainly a step forward in that area is going to be critical if the Beavers are going to have a chance of battling with the Ducks. That's our look into the Oregon State side of things. On the other side of this break, we'll talk about the Duck side of things with Erik Skopil from 24/7 Sports. You're listening to the Danny and Justin radio program, Fox Sports Eugene and Newport. Back in the Bigfoot Beverages studios on a Tuesday, Danny and Justin on Fox Sports in Newport. Justin is today as we talk about the Civil War this week. We had our Beaver perspective yesterday. Now let's get our Duck perspective today. Joining me on the Oregon Man Clinics hotline is Erik Skopil, Oregon football beat reporter for Duck Territory at 24/7 Sports. Erik, as we head into this game, how close to your expectation has Oregon's season gone so far?
I think they're ahead of schedule. I think it's funny. One of the things I've been thinking about is we think back to, and maybe this is just the first two games, and we have to recalculate a little bit after the third game. Which again, I don't think the Northwestern game was a poor showing really by any means. But I've heard people kind of a little bit more critical, maybe more things to digest. But the way the 2024 season started, where they had kind of the up and down play against Idaho and Boise State, right? Two games that were 1 and 2 score games, a lot closer than expected. That was kind of maybe what you would have expected with a young team this year, as opposed to a year ago when you had all these veteran presences, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think the first two games, that the fact that they won by, I think the margin was like 112 combined points, and it was really almost faultless. You did come away, at least I did, feeling like, man, this is a couple steps ahead of where I had anticipated they would be. And I don't think I was the only one who felt that. I know Joel Klatt and Kirk Herbstreit and some of these national analysts had kind of begun to say, could Oregon be one of the best teams in the country? Is this like one of the real, genuine national championship contenders? And I don't think myself and some others had let myself kind of look at things that way, just because there was all this newness. There was 18 new starters, and a lot of these guys were going to be freshmen or sophomores or transfers in their first year in the program. And so I think it was kind of the natural progression or thought process, at least, to go, well, maybe there will be some ups and downs. The offensive line has 4 out of 5 guys are new starters, and they haven't played together. Last year, they had more than that returning, and it was a real issue early on the offensive line. And last year, you had Dylan Gabriel, who was a 6th-year senior, and this year you got Dante Moore, who is a 3rd-year player but only has a handful of starts under his belt. And the defense you could pick through and kind of have similar observations, And so the fact that through the first 3 games, they've really taken care of business. Games haven't been competitive, and some of that's a byproduct of playing, I think, an easier schedule than anticipated. Oklahoma State clearly nowhere near what we expected they would be when that game was scheduled. Montana State dropped. I don't know if people noticed, they lost their second game of the season as well. And the Northwestern, the one team they beat was Western Illinois, which is arguably the worst FCS team of the past decade or so. So I think it's hard to really measure everything, and certainly Oregon State's not going to do probably much to really kind of assess that. But at the same time, I think just the dominance of the first 3 weeks, especially those first 2 games, stands out as a step ahead of where I thought they'd be, and certainly a little bit more smooth, almost across the board than my expectation.
And I was right along there with you. I just thought there was enough unknowns with this team that I just wasn't ready to sit here and say, like, oh, they're a national title contender. But I think a lot of people were like that. But it also, in a lot of ways, totally makes sense that they're as good as they are, because the pieces kind of were all there. The talent was always there. It just was about can this team put it together? And last year we saw a talented team didn't quite put it together right away, and eventually they did. But this team seems like they've sort of clicked things early on. You kind of detailed, yes, their opponents haven't been necessarily quite as impressive, but and against Northwestern, not a great fourth quarter. I think that's the thing people are kind of talking about, and you're talking about in terms of the impressiveness of the performance against Northwestern and how people feel like maybe it wasn't as good as a performance as Oregon could have had. But to you, how much weight? And obviously there's going to be things that Oregon and Dan Lanning are going to want to work on, but just in terms of how much weight does that fourth quarter have in terms of your perception on this team?
I think it's a young team showing some growing pains to a certain degree. I think it's I don't know how much of it translates, frankly, to what it'll be in a couple weeks when they play a team like Penn State, because the reality is a lot of the personnel that was on the field, when you think about it, Dante Moore wasn't out there when they weren't able to punch the ball in from 11 yards out. The defense, it was a walk-on linebacker who missed a tackle that was in part due to or led to the 79-yard touchdown. The players that were in coverage on some of those plays, the explosive downfield, not a starter. So you could kind of caveat your way through it and indicate, like, they were up 31-0 through three quarters. They had, I think, almost three times as many total yards as Northwestern did at that point in the game. All those things kind of are, hey, they did a great job for three quarters. In the fourth quarter, when it wasn't the key players in the game, Northwestern obviously motivated to do some things, to put some points on the board, to put together some good drives. That's encouraging. Or that was maybe discouraging, I should say. I think the part that I also picked up from Dan and even myself in rewatch was, the run game wasn't great even before the fourth quarter, when Oregon had its starters in. And the run defense wasn't great at times in the same sequences. And Northwestern, if not for some penalties and some turnovers and some mishandled balls by the quarterback, those drives kind of were stalled out in part because of Northwestern's own mistakes. And so I'm almost more concerned about some of those things than I am about the fourth quarter. But I also there's a lot of excuses if you want to use them, or there's a lot of reasons if you want to be a little bit more, I guess, favorable in your terminology of, hey, younger team going on the road for the first time, 9 a.m. kickoff, stadium that had absolutely no atmosphere. It kind of makes sense that some of the stuff doesn't work. And frankly, Northwestern, probably a little better football team than some people wanted to give them credit for, in part on the offensive and defensive lines. So I'm not ringing any alarm bells. I don't expect people should be overly concerned. I guess if you see some of these same issues, in terms of the trench play, where they're against Oregon State, those are not their strengths at all, then we've got something to talk about going into Penn State. But for the time being, I think you go, hey, a lot of reasons why this didn't look great. I wouldn't be too concerned. It maybe just be a one-off.
Erik Skopil is with us. He is the Oregon football beat reporter for Derek Territory for 24/7 Sports. And you mentioned the run defense and how it wasn't necessarily just the fourth quarter. Something that the Beavers, I think, have wanted to be coming into the season. They have Anthony Hankerson, and in theory, the offensive line there was questions about, but in theory, they're a team that has wanted to, and traditionally has been a running team. They're only averaging 2.6 yards per rush coming into this game. But do you think that if there is a place that the Beavers are going to try to, if there's a button they're trying to push, it is going to be attacking the Ducks in that run game?
I think ultimately, just based upon the splits, this has been a team that's been leaning on its quarterback. And it makes sense when you have a player, at least with the physical traits of Malik Murphy, who, say what you will about some of the stats there, you watch him, the ball just explodes out of his hand. And so I do think ultimately they'd like to throw the ball down the field. They'd like to take advantage of some of the youth at corner. They also, I'm sure, Ryan Gunderson and company over for the Beavers are aware that, how do you get Oregon susceptible there in terms of the defenses you're facing? It's going to be because you can set something up on the ground. And they certainly can't do what they did a week ago at Texas Tech, where I believe Hankerson ran 11 times for 12 yards.
Yep.
If they're trying to set up any sort of ability even to have success through the air, which it seems like that's the strength of that offense, they've got to be better there. And to your point earlier, I think the offensive line, that stands out looking at kind of what PFF says, watching some of their games, listening to Trent Bray's press conference. That's not seemingly the strength of that team. They're dealing with some injuries, maybe some talent drain. I know they've got some guys out there who probably weren't expected to be. If Trent Brand Company had everything kind of lined up the way they would back in the start of fall camp or back in the spring, they probably wouldn't be out there. So I guess I'm curious to see if I'm Oregon State, what level of success they can have running the football. And if ultimately that even becomes something they can lean on. And if it's not, I think it's really hard to expect them to have much success, especially like vertically in the passing game, given the fact that like as good as Trent Walker is, he's more of a possession receiver. And they've got a little bit of speed on the outside with like a David Wells, but I don't know if it's more speed than what Oregon has in its secondary. So I guess long way of saying it, like I'm sure they want to and will go in trying to establish the ground game. And frankly, like if they're able to do that, that should open up a lot of their maybe their aerial attack. And if you're Oregon, I think you feel like you should be able to man up with those guys on the outside and play aggressive run defense if that's what's called for. But you might also get to the point where you say that's actually not the best way to approach this because they can't run the ball even against unloaded boxes. So that's going to be interesting to see kind of just what their success is early there for the Beavers. Yeah, and especially for the Beavers, you're going to have athletes out there for Oregon that are on the higher level, I think. And so to have them sort of take the extra split second off of a play action, for instance, to make a decision, I think obviously on the Oregon side, they're going to want them to play downhill and just be aggressive. So that is going to be kind of an interesting battle in this game. Just thinking about Oregon as a whole, we're 3 games in now. We've kind of gotten a little bit more of a sense of what this team is. What would you say the identity of this team is? That's a good question. I think I would have probably said I was really impressed with the physicality at the line of scrimmage, especially the first 2 games. I still think that's a strength. Like you go back and you watch that Oklahoma State game and the Montana State game, and what really popped to me is like Oregon has better athletes, but they also have better athletes that are busting their butt out there, and the way that they were able to incorporate, not just their offensive line, but their tight ends and the running backs and the receivers and that kind of personnel as blockers. Like I thought it was notable. Like DeCorian Moore, like the first impression people had of him in the opener was, hey, he made a couple plays with the ball, but also he's downfield blocking his butt off and opening up a touchdown for Gary Bryant Jr. And the next week, the same thing with Kenyon Sadiq. Yeah, he touched the ball, had some success, but also he was instrumental in getting De'Aaron Hill into the end zone. And there's other players who could point to. Jeremiah McClellan had some key blocks. Jamari Johnson had some key blocks. Jaden Lamar, when they went to 21 personnel with 2 running backs in the field, absolutely obliterated a couple of guys, including on the first touchdown of the game for Noah Whittington. So I think offensively, that's what really stood out to me was that there's just like an unselfishness. I mean, skill players are explosive, and I think in the second game and even last week we saw a little bit of more of that in terms of just the ability to make explosives, especially against Oklahoma State. But it really stood out just kind of how much these guys all bought into. We might be more talented than this opponent, but we're also going to like outwork them, and we're going to be more physical than them. And that was something that you expect from, again, like a more veteran team. You don't necessarily expect that from a team where you're starting a bunch of guys who haven't been starters before, and frankly, like true freshmen on both sides of the football. And defensively, it was the same kind of thing. Was hey, we didn't know exactly what they were going to be in that front 7. We didn't know, frankly, what they'd be in the secondary, but everybody you saw out there was physical and was reliable tacklers in the open field. Didn't give up much of anything. They were very disruptive those first 2 games, especially, and even the third game in terms of impacting the quarterback. So, I guess just big picture, like there's a level of physicality that has really impressed me and stood out. There's a level of kind of toughness and effort that you don't always see from the stereotypical, team out west that is comprised of all of these 4- and 5-star recruits. You don't necessarily think they're gonna play that way. You think, oh, flash, speed, all that stuff, which is still there. But there's kind of a ruggedness to this team that I really have appreciated the first couple of games. And again, that was maybe something that was missing a little bit against Northwestern. And hopefully that's something that gets corrected this week going into the game with the Beavers. And particularly against Oklahoma State. I mean, they made some blocks that were like, I mean, it's fun to watch. Like you have to get skill position guys out there putting in full effort,
15 yards down the line of scrimmage, and you're just like, man, like this is just how football should be played. And obviously that was reflected in the final score. But it just hasn't been them. And it's also been the skill position players as well. I think there's a lot of interesting kind of storylines here coming into this season, obviously. I mean, even Dan Lanning kind of made fun of this the other day about like the receivers are pretty good. And not just that, you have a guy coming in that's expected to be the number one guy at running back in Mekhi Hughes. He doesn't end up being that guy. It's Noah Whittington, but then even he didn't play against Northwestern, and there's about a billion guys, it feels like, on this team that can come in and get 7 yards a carry. I'm exaggerating here, but I think you know what I'm getting at. But just kind of talk to me about your impressions of the skill position players so far as well.
Yeah, and I think the things that stand out first are, they're dealing with some injuries and some kind of turnover at receiver, obviously, and I won't say it's the same top ceiling talent. Maybe I'm not taking anything away from DeCorian necessarily, but like I think you looked at this without Evan Stewart and with Tez Johnson and Trayshawn Holden going, 2 players in the NFL. For Franklin the year before, obviously somebody's having, I think, maybe potentially a breakout season with the Broncos, and it was easy to go like, did they have the answers there? And I think unequivocally you feel really good about what you see there. Malik Benson has been, to me, one of the top standouts. Maybe the biggest surprise in his offense from a positive perspective has been this guy was kind of overlooked after 2 disappointing seasons at 2 different Power 4 schools, Alabama and Florida State, after being, you have a case, one of the best JUCO wide receiver prospects for the last 15 to 20 years. And this was a really big time prospect coming out of there. And you kind of didn't know. It was kind of easy to overlook and didn't really pop in the spring game. I think the big kind of reference point was how he dropped what could have been a long touchdown pass, in that game. And he comes out and he's been there. He's leading the team in receptions and targets and receiving yards and receiving touchdowns. Like he's been everything as advertised and fits really well opposite of DeCorian out there as kind of the Z receiver running the longer routes and stretching the defense. And he and Dante seem to have a connection. He's been reliable. So that's kind of helped shore some things up, right? In the backfield, you mentioned it. Like, who thought they were going to be really using 6 running backs when games are competitive, right?
Yeah.
Mekhi Hughes' role is completely different than what most people, myself included, anticipated. I thought Noah Whittington and Jaden Lamar would be involved, but I'm surprised that Jay Harris, De'Aaron Hill, and Jordan Davison seem to have roles on this team, right? I mean, the 2 true freshmen. I can't think of the last time they've had 2 true freshman running backs as good as this, right? You can think of true freshmen individually, whether it be like a Royce Freeman or a Thomas Tyner, guys that came out and were immediately productive players, but to have 2 of them on the same team in a running back room that's this crowded, that they've carved out roles where, like Mekhi Hughes comes over as the top running back in the country from a returning production perspective, and yet he's getting outperformed by a couple of true freshmen. I don't think anybody really expected that. So, yeah, there's a lot that stands out there. I guess the thing to look forward for me in terms of like what I'd like to see is so much was made of Kenyon Sadiq coming into the season, and could he be kind of the focal point? Could he have a Brock Bowers, Tyler Warren, Colston Loveland kind of a role in this offense? And yet he's certainly been impressive when he has touched the ball, but it's been 2 or 3 times a game primarily. What's it going to look like when they get to some of these tougher games, and how much will they lean into him? I think that's something that I'm interested about. So, no, they got a large complement of players, and they all complement each other well. It feels so far to be a strength of this team, and I don't know if people had really pegged it that way. Although you looked up and said, "Gosh, a bunch of high 4-star, 5-star talent, especially at receiver." So maybe we were kind of overlooking it, but so much of it was unproven. And I think you've seen through at least 3 games, like, gosh, there's a lot of this that looks really good.
Right, and it's one of those things that looking back, you can kind of be like, well, what were we thinking? Of course, all the high 4 stars and 5 stars are good, but it's just, you don't know when coming into the year, and you just haven't seen it. And so, you got to watch it on the field. But just a couple more questions for you, Erik, before we let you go. Obviously, Oregon State really stumbling coming into this game. There's a different feel to it in terms of this is we don't know the future of the game. This is the last one that's on the schedule for the foreseeable future. Does this game feel like a little less to you, or like just what's your sense of like how this game feels in terms of like, obviously for the players it doesn't quite mean as much anymore just with all the turnover, but just in terms of everything else, like does it feel like different for you?
I wish it didn't, but it does. Like, I guess is a weird way of saying it. Like I somebody who grew up in Eugene and went to so many of these games growing up, and has felt the significance of the rivalry and has close friends who went to Oregon State and know how much that football program has meant to them, and has family the same way, and has been part of kind of some fun back and forth ribbing. Like, it's just kind of all that's sort of gone this week. There's almost like when the spread's 34.5 or wherever it is now, I mean, there's kind of almost this kind of finality to it, or like it's a foregone conclusion. Like, we had Angie Machado from Beaver Blitz, the 24/7 Sports Oregon State affiliate, on our podcast, Matt and I, this morning, the Outs and Audibles, and she's pretty realistic about, like, there's not much expectation for this game to be more than even to be even really all that competitive, and like the keys for her are just seeing better effort and seeing cutting down on penalties, because the expectation isn't that they're going to be able to really compete because of the disparity in talent and the disparity in resources and the disparity in that has really shifted. So, no, it does feel different. And again, I wish it didn't. Yeah, I mean, Oregon has, I think, for a long time had advantages with resources and advantages with talent. But, Oregon State, to their credit, had made this a very competitive series as recently as a couple of years ago. Obviously, winning Dan Lanning's first Civil War game was a game in Corvallis that Oregon State won. I think people go, oh, this series has not been all that competitive. Well, you only have to go 3 years ago to go. There's an instance where that wasn't the case, and certainly Oregon has put it on them the last couple of years, and I think the expectation is that'll be the case again on Saturday. But yeah, it does feel different, and I understand from the Oregon State perspective if this doesn't feel like a game that they want to keep playing. I think they should. I think Oregon, at least the fans and Dan Lanning himself, have kind of said it's a game that they'd like to prioritize. But, because of some things that are going on in the sport, some of which I think are kind of unfair to Oregon State and some of these smaller programs, there's such a disparity here that it is difficult to kind of appreciate it the way it used to be. Because, even in years like I remember when Marcus Mariota was here, his last couple of seasons even, those are knockout, drag-out games, and Oregon was one of the best teams in the country, and the Beavers may not have been an 11 or 12-win team. They might not have even been an 8 or 9-win team some of those seasons, but they at least made the games interesting for 3 or 4, 3 quarters, and sometimes all the way down to the end. So, yeah, some of that is vacant here and absent, and that's too bad. It feels like this game also being played in September kind of changes things. These aren't finished products by any means, and in a certain way, could that be additive to maybe the less talented team has some advantages early in the season and can kind of make up for some of those shortcomings? But I don't know. I'm not expecting Saturday to be very competitive. I don't think I'm the only one, and I guess that is kind of a bummer, just somebody who has appreciated this rivalry for so long.
Yeah, no, I think that's very well encapsulated by you, Eric, and we appreciate your time as always. Your coverage is terrific. We'll keep track of it all week and throughout the season. We're lucky to have you on the Danny and Justin radio program. We'll talk to you at some point here soon.
All right. Appreciate it. Anytime.
That's Erik Skopil of 24/7 Sports, the big friend of the Danny and Justin radio program, Skopil Damas. We'll wrap a bow on this show and hear from Dan Lanning after this break. You're listening to the Danny and Justin radio program, Just Justin, today on Core 1050 AM, 102.9 FM, and KNCU 92.7, Fox Sports Newport. Welcome back to the Danny and Justin radio program, Fox Sports Eugene and Newport, here on a Tuesday. Already looking forward to Thursday and Thursday night football. It's waiver wires for my fantasy leagues tonight and tomorrow. Got a league where it's actually tonight, which is kind of nice. Get to know who my pickups are going to be. But let's continue our conversation about the Ducks and Dan Lanning. Got some audio from him from yesterday's presser and talked a little bit with Erik Skopil about the future of this rivalry. And it sounds like from the Ducks' perspective, Dan Lanning and the Ducks want it to continue.
Yeah, control what you can control. It's certainly a game that I hope stays on the schedule for, the opportunity to get to play somebody in state. Obviously, we travel a little bit more with the Big Ten. I know their conference is going to be reset and different, and they're going to be traveling a little bit more. I think it makes sense to have, teams that can play each other. They're relatively close. And again, I think it's 129 years that this rivalry's existed. That's something you'd like to keep alive.
1894 is when this rivalry began. Oregon with a pretty hefty lead at this point, but this game certainly talked about it with Erik Skopil in 24/7 Sports. And if you missed it, catch it on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. We're going to upload it sometime here after the show. But I think one of the things that is interesting about the situation for Dan Lanning is, how much the Ducks are favored by, and coming into this game, it's sort of another situation like they've been in over the past few weeks with teams that aren't necessarily on the talent level that Oregon's expected to face. Certainly the opponent coming up next week, that will be a big test for them. But it's interesting to hear what his points of emphasis are going to be coming into this game.
Well, I think this game consistently has come down to line of scrimmage play. And again, that was a disappointment for me last week. I didn't think we handled the line of scrimmage as well as we need to. So that'll be a point of emphasis for us this week. I think it's really important. They do some things to combat that. The ball's going to come out quick. They're going to use some different stuff in protection, I'm sure, some different run game that's going to challenge you and not allow you just to tee off. So we'll just have to play what we see. And those guys have great experience. They've been good against the run. And they've been good against, when they get opportunities to rush the passer, but those may be limited in a game like this.
And it's going to be huge on the trenches, especially on the offensive side, I think, for the Beavers and Malik Murphy, who, man, he has a cannon, but he's got to have some time. What does Dan Lanning think of Malik Murphy?
It's one of the strongest arms we've seen, right? I think he's got a cannon and, delivered a deep ball last week Saturday against Texas Tech that was, really impressive. So he's got a strong arm. He can throw it on a rope. That's one thing that really stands out. It's impressive by him. He's obviously been part of winning in the past. He has a lot of experience in different places. So I don't know if there's a lot you can throw at him that he's not prepared for. But yeah, he's certainly a quarterback that's capable of giving us issues if we're not aware of where he's going with the ball and we don't do a great job in coverage.
Ducks will take the Oregon State Beavers seriously in this matchup, and I'm sure we'll continue to break it down throughout the week. Not sure we're going to have on tomorrow. I do know we're going to have on Mike Parker at some point this week. We're working it out with Mike whenever we're going to have him on. Steve Mims is going to be in here tomorrow with me and through Friday. He'll also be here next week. Thanks for listening to myself, Justin Grossweiner, here on the Danny and Justin program. Again, just Justin today. Put a smile on your face and someone else's face. They deserve it, and so do you. Thanks for listening. We'll be back after this 23-hour break. Peace!